There's a city in northern Ukraine that once stood as a model of Soviet progress. Built from scratch in the 1970s, it was clean, modern, and full of young families. It had schools, swimming pools, theaters, tree-lined boulevards, and a population that believed they were living in the future. Then, in a matter of hours, it emptied. The story of Pripyat is more than just a nuclear disaster. It's a geographic story about how where we build, why we build, and what happens when we're forced to leave. It's a story of human geography, how people relate to places and how those places shape identity, memory, and survival. This is the story of a city that vanished and what happened after. In the early 1970s, the Soviet Union set out to build a city with a very specific purpose: to support the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. That meant choosing a site close to the plant, but far enough from major population centers to ease concerns about safety. Eventually, they picked a spot near the Pripyat River, a few kilometers from the Belarusian border. It was remote, forested, out of the way. In geographic terms, it was a blank slate, and that was the point. Pripyat was designed from the ground up, part of a series of Soviet atomograds, or nuclear towns. These cities weren't organic or accidental. They were planned, precise, and symbolic. High-rise apartment blocks were built for maximum efficiency. Every district was organized around schools, parks, and shops. It was urban planning engineered to promote a certain kind of life: modern, optimistic, and deeply tied to the nuclear industry. By 1986, Pripyat was home to nearly 50,000 people. The average age, just 26. This was a place built for the young, for workers and scientists, for the next generation of Soviet citizens. It was isolated but self-sufficient, connected by rail, nestled near a river, and surrounded by trees. A place defined by its geography, and entirely dependent on the nuclear plant that gave it life. When the Chernobyl reactor exploded on April 26, 1986, Pripyat didn't react immediately. People went to work, children played outside, it was a clear spring morning. But the geography of the city, its proximity to the plant, and its exposure to prevailing winds meant that within hours, radiation levels soared. The very reason Pripyat had been built where it was now became its greatest vulnerability. By the next day, the decision was made. The city had to be evacuated. At 1 p.m. on April 27th, an announcement went out. Residents had to leave. They were told temporarily, just for a few days, bring your documents, a change of clothes, some food, leave the rest. What followed was one of the fastest urban evacuations in history. In just a few hours, buses arrived from across the region. Thousands of residents boarded and left behind their homes, their pets, their lives. By nightfall, the city was empty. But the geography of the evacuation was just as important as the event itself. Pripyat was designed as a closed city, tight, compact, with few major roads in or out. That made evacuation more logistically manageable, but it also made it feel final. Once people left, returning wasn't simple. The entire region was soon declared an exclusion zone, 30 kilometers sealed off from the outside world. The geography that once enabled life now enforced absence. Pripyat had been designed as a city of the future, but in a single afternoon it became a city of the past. When the buses pulled away from Pripyat, they weren't just taking people out of danger, they were severing them from a place that had defined their identity. In the days and weeks that followed, evacuees were scattered across Ukraine. Some stayed with family, others were sent to rural villages or summer camps. But the question quickly became, where would they go next? The answer came in the form of a new city, Slavutich. Built only about 50 kilometers from the original site on uncontaminated land, it was designed to replace what had been lost. It had new housing, new schools, and new infrastructure, but it wasn't Pripyat. Even so, for many of these evacuees, it became home. Slavutich represented more than shelter. It was an attempt to reconstruct a geographic identity. The city was designed collaboratively with districts planned by architects from across the Soviet republics. Each neighborhood carried a different cultural imprint. In a strange way, the new geography of Slavutich reflected the dislocation itself, a mosaic city for a displaced people. But not everyone ended up there. Some moved to Kyiv, others to villages or cities far away. Over time, families dispersed, and the connection to Pripyat became more about memory than geography. Back in Pripyat, the buildings stood still. The streets cracked, the forest crept in. Without people, the city became something else entirely. An exclusion zone, a ghost town, a forbidden map. The human geography of the region had been completely redrawn. One city vanished, another appeared. But the space in between, what was lost and what was mourned, never fully disappeared. Human geography isn't just about where we live, it's about how we live and what happens when that place is taken from us. Pripyat was a city created by geography, by proximity to power, by Soviet planning, by the promise of nuclear energy. It was a place where a location defined opportunity, community, and identity. But when disaster struck, that same geography dictated the speed of the evacuation, the scope of the damage, and the impossibility of return. Today, Pripyat remains frozen in time, not just because of radiation, but because its story is unfinished, because the people who lived there still remember the map of their lives before the lines were erased, and because no matter where they ended up, a part of them never left.